بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, in the previous lessons that we had in this book, the short fiqh lessons, we were looking at the conditions that have to be fulfilled for our fiqh actions to be accepted. We previously looked at Islam and Iman, and in the previous lesson we looked at the rulings that apply for various actions. This evening, alhamdulillah, we also look at another aspect which makes the actions of fiqh compulsory. Those rulings then apply to the individual who essentially, we might know the term in Arabic, when the person becomes baligh. And this is a very interesting section because we get also nasiha, advice for parents in terms of raising kids. All of that is embedded in this particular section. And so baligh or bulugh, if we are to translate it, refers to puberty. We also maybe get the word mukallaf. Have we heard of the word mukallaf? So sometimes we get the word mukallaf, we get the word baligh. Are they the same thing? Are they? Some say no, some say yes. So when one becomes baligh in reality is a concept that we calculate in the development of a human, meaning you obtain puberty. And when you become baligh, you are then mukallaf. You are accountable in terms of the actions that have to be performed. But the concept of taklif, the concept of being mukallaf, is something that a Muslim must be reared into from young already. That a child from young must be raised, must be taught that you will be accountable to Allah. You are accountable to Allah. And when that child becomes baligh, they are mukallaf. Baligh you can reach through health, through development. But mukallaf is a concept that affects all Muslims. That everyone will become mukallaf. So we look at the text this evening very briefly. The Shaykh writes, Alamatul bulugh thalath, that the signs of becoming baligh are three. This is a very important aspect, especially for young parents, but also to understand a very important teaching here. Firstly, the Shaykh says that once the child reaches, so let's also just quickly differentiate, you can become baligh, hukmi, and haqiqi. You can become baligh by virtue of the ruling applying to you, and you can become baligh through your body experiencing something. So the Shaykh writes, the first thing, if the child, male or female, reaches 15 years of age, the ruling of bulugh gets applied to them. So if they reach 15, whether male or female, by virtue of the age, the hukum, the ruling is given, that child is now baligh, and as such, mukallaf. And as such, the laws that we discussed previously, if something is fard, it now applies, meaning that there will be punishment. And then the second, that the Shaykh speaks about, the second sign of bulugh, is if the child experiences a wet dream or a nocturnal emission. In their sleep, the child has a nocturnal emission, then by virtue of that occurring, the child is baligh. And so when a child is already, realistically in today's era, 6, 7 years old, they have to be alerted. Their parents must teach them that if something happens, you must report it. And they mustn't even, a child shouldn't even write it off as maybe they just urinated in their bed. They have to be educated, because once that point is reached, the child is accountable. And lastly, if the girl menstruates, so when she reaches that, and also realistically, a girl, before she menstruates the first time, she might spot. She might not immediately menstruate. This is a common question that moms often, send me, describing this has occurred, but then there wasn't any bleeding. Has the child become baligh? So we need, of course, the confirmation of a period, menstruation, then the child is baligh. What is really beautiful about this section, beloved brothers and sisters, is the concept of tamyiz, of the child being mumayyiz. Now that's the third term I'm teaching tonight, inshallah. We speak about baligh, we speak about mukallaf, and now we have the term mumayyiz. Mumayyiz is when the child is able, and so the ulama have written, firstly, the child can do the following on his or her own. They can eat, drink, and clean themselves after going to the toilet. That is in terms of their bodily functions and capacity. And then in terms of fiqh, they are able to differentiate between right and wrong. So when the child is mumayyiz, this is an important stage, because once the child is mumayyiz, the responsibility is upon the parent, grandparent, the community, the family, the community. Everyone plays a role in conscientizing the mumayyiz child on preparation for fiqh. And that is why our beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, told us and taught us that you teach the child, you instruct the child to perform the salah at which age? 7 years. At the age of 7, you must instruct the child to perform the salah. And at the age of 10, you discipline the child. Hadith says you hit them lightly. You discipline the child. And this is even if the child is not baligh. So what's the purpose? Because you prepare the child to be mukallaf, to be accountable to Allah. So the minute the child comes to the masjid, and the child is 5 years old, right? The child comes to the masjid, or in your family the child is 5 years old. What is your responsibility as an adult? To recognize that, mashallah, this child is mumayyiz. He can eat, drink, and go to toilet on his own or on her own. So the adults in that family have a responsibility that you have to now conscientize the child, right? Salah time. So sometimes parents, say, die kind is nog so young, man. So right. No, but there's a fiqh ruling that applies. When the child is 4, 5, mumayyiz, you teach them salah time. No, adhan. We stop now. They must prepare. And at 7, we instruct them, perform the salah. And at 10, we discipline for breaking the rules. And this is all preceding bulugh. And then the final gem that I want to share with you is in that very same hadith, our beloved Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam continues and says, and separate the beds. So there's a very important principle here that we extend to all. That is, when a child, or when a person, let's talk about a child. When a child reaches 7, you teach them about the laws, you command them to do it. When they reach 10, you have to discipline them, and they may no longer sleep with each other under the same blanket. So the hadith says, literally, separate their beds. And when we look at this teaching, this is not specific to males from females. Sometimes we get it wrong. We think we must separate the boys from the girls only. No, it's across the board. It is across the board that a child must be separated, because at the age of 7 already, the ulama have written, you start separating them from 7, that any child 7 and older may not share a blanket with another. Why? Because the conceptualization of differences in the body is there. And from that stage, they move into sexual development. So, the ulama have written, to prevent a fitna, you separate the children. Because kids would be curious as well. And so this ruling of separating beds, the preferred separation is completely separate beds so that you can't roll onto each other. But Imam Nawawi rahimahullah has written that if you cannot separate beds, bare minimum is that they sleep under separate blankets. And this concept applies to everyone, from 7 until your death. That even brothers, even sisters can't sleep under the same blanket, even if they are grown adults, to prevent fitna. Because the body, we are not accountable for things that happen in sleep, but they could be inappropriate gestures and touching. And I think even in today's era, the world is extremely corrupt. And so it's very important to implement this from young. And for adults as well, sometimes people go camping and they want to sleep under the same blanket. So just to prevent that fitna, this rule applies from 7 all the way. From 10, completely haram for even same gender to be under the same blanket. It is preferred separation. Maybe like the Hujjaj who will be on Mina, they're on their own mattresses, their own blankets. In our homes, the kids in separate beds. If we can't afford to have them under separate beds, each child must have their own, blanket, inshallah. So we close this evening recognizing that taklif, the obligation to worship Allah, comes about with bulugh, puberty. That bulugh can come about through bodily maturation, wet dreams and menstruation, or through the ruling by becoming 15 years old. And children from young must be nurtured to fulfill the obligations of taklif before they approach bulugh. This is a very important closing tip, inshallah, nasiha to myself, to all parents and grandparents as well. Don't wait until the moment when the girl received her period to say, go put on a scarf. So it's very late, because by then she has been raised for 9 years or whatever, 6 years, that you can roam around with your hair open. And then that child might rebel. So if from young mothers and fathers are teaching the girls, mashallah, we have Eid coming up, very important occasion as well. From young already, we teach the girls, cover up, the boys dress modestly. Sometimes they say, you see the kids, and the kids are wearing skinny jeans. Small young kids, because that's the fashion. And they say, he's just 7 years old, it's just 8 years old, it's no problem. Now when the child is already mumayyiz, now when the child becomes baligh, now we want to say, no, astaghfirullah, you can't wear that tight pants. But then we bought it 3 years prior to that moment. So we nurture our children, the tarbiyah of our children is, inshallah, as soon as you are mumayyiz, to understand that Allah rewards for good behavior and Allah punishes for bad behavior. From young, when they come to bulugh, it becomes easy. Any questions, beloved brothers? Jazakallah khairan wa sallallahu wa sallam alayhi wa